For an event planner, your own wedding day is supposed to be the ultimate final project, the masterpiece. For 7 years I had pictures these days, plan it, braid it, and as the morning sun poured into the bridal suit of the old suburban Chicago church, I could honestly say it was perfect. My dress, a simple but elegant satin A-line, hung like a sculpture by the window. The scent of lilies and eucalyptus, my chosen bouquet, filled the air. Everything down the last handwritten place card were exactly as it should be. My sister and maid of honor, Sarah, handed me a glass of champagne. "You're the calmest bride I've ever seen," she said, a wide smile on her face. "Are you sure you're not secretly freaking out?" I took a small sip and laughed. "Sarah, I've managed glass for Fortune 500 CEOs who change the seating charts 10 minutes before dinner. This," I gestured around the serene room, "is a walk in the park." And it was, because this wasn't for a client. It was for me and Mike. Mike, the man who could literally bring people back from the dead, a paramedic. He saw the worst of humanity every single day, yet he always came home to me with a smile that could light up a room. He was my rock, my safe place. We'd met in college and had been inseparable ever since. Our world, our whole life together was a project we'd built from the ground up, just like our house. 2 years ago, we'd bought a run-down little bungalow, the kind of place other people would have torn down. But we saw the good bones. We spent weeks drawing up the plans, and Mike spent his days off tearing down walls and putting up drywall. I remembered him standing in the skeletal frame of our future kitchen, covered in sawdust, his arms covered in scripts. He'd pulled me close, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, "This is it, Ava. This is where we'll grow old." We poured every spare dollar and every ounce of sweat into that house. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was our shared dream made real. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Mike's partner, Dave, looking sharp in his groomman's hat. 5 minutes, ladies. The groom is starting to look a little green." Sarah laughed and started shooing me towards the door. My heart begins to do a little flip-flop in my chest. This was it. Just as I was about to step out, I remembered the custom cufflinks I bought for Mike. They were engraved with the coordinates of the spots where he first told me he loved me. I've given them to his mom, Carol, to give to him, but in the chaos, I wasn't sure he's gotten them. His phone was sitting on the vanity, where he'd left it after dropping off my breakfast that morning. I figured I'd shoot him a quick text. I picked up the phone. His lock screen was a picture of us, smiling on the front porch of our bungalow. The day we finished painting the front door, I smiled, feeling that familiar warmth spread through my chest. But as my thumb went to swipe, the screen lit up with a new message. A message from someone named Chloe. "I can't do this without you. Please, I need you." The name wasn't familiar. My brow furrowed. The name wasn't familiar. My brow furrowed. I knew all of his friends, his colleagues, his family. And a sudden, cold knot formed in my stomach. It was probably nothing. A patient, maybe. He was always going above and beyond. Still, the message felt intense, needy. The door creaked open again. It was Mike. "Hey, I forget my—" He trailed off, and he saw me holding his phone. The message grew glowing on the screen. His face changed. It was subtle, but a slight tightening around his eyes, but I saw it. He walked over and gently took the phone from my hands. "Who's Chloe?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, casual, trying to ignore the cold dread creeping up my spine. He didn't look at me. He was already typing a reply. "Oh, he's just a patient I had a few weeks ago. A tough case. She doesn't have much family, and she's been going through a rough time. I'm just trying to help her get back on her feet." He finally looked tough, and his smile was back, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't worry about it, babe. Today is about us. Nothing else matters." He leaned in and kissed my forehead. "You look breathtaking, by the way." For a moment, I let the warmth of his words, pushing the doubt away. He was a good man, the best man I knew. Of course, he would help someone in need. That was why I loved him. That's what being silly, letting a little pre-wedding paranoia get to me. I took a deep breath, smiled back, and let Sarah lead me out of the room. The walk down the aisle was a blur of smiling face and camera flashes. The church was packed. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the white runner. And at the end of it all was Mike, standing tall and handsome, his eyes locked on me. As my father placed my hand in his, he squeezed it, his palm warm and steady. The knot in my stomach finally dissolved. Everything was right. The pastor began to speak, his voice a low, comforting hum. I looked into Mike's eyes, and I saw out the future. The finished kitchen, kids playing in the backyard of the bungalow, us, and Gray still holding hands. We were about to say our vows when a commotion erupted at the back of the church. The heavy oak doors burst open, and for a second, I thought it was late guest, but it was Dave, Mike's partner. He wasn't walking, he was running. His face pale, his expression frantic. He didn't stop until he reached to the altar, ignoring the gasps from the guests and the pastor's confused stare. He leaned in and whispered something urgently in Mike's ear. I watched as the color drained from Mike's face. The hand holding mine went cold and slack. His eyes, which had been filled with love and adoration just seconds before, were now wide with a look of pure panic. He turned to me. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. He swallowed hard. "Ava, I'm so sorry," he whispered. The words barely audible. And then he let go of my hand. He turned, and without another word, without a single look back, he ran past my stunned father, past our shocked families and friends, past the rows of guests whose whispers were quickly rising to a roar. He ran out the open doors of the church, leaving me standing alone at the altar, my perfect day shattered into a million pieces. The sounds of Mike's footsteps faded, but the silence he left behind were deafening. It's a vacuum, sucking all the air and warmth out of the church. For a full sentence, nobody moved. I stood frozen at the altar, a bride with no groom, a statue in a white dress. Then the whisper started. It wasn't a murmur, it was a hiss, like steam escaped a cracked pipe. And it grew louder with every passing second. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me. They weren't looks of pity. They were looks of morbid curiosity, the kind people give a car wreck on the side of the highway. I could see the questions in their eyes, the judgment. My perfectly planned day had just become the juiciest piece of gossip for the next 10 years. My father, bless his heart, stepped forward and put a hand on my arm. "Ava," he said, his voice thick with a mixture of confusion and rage. Let's get you out of here." My mother and Sarah rushed into my other side, forming a protective wall. But I couldn't move. My ethereal moments ago now felt like a lit blanket putting me down. A bouquet of lilies in my hand was a dead weight. I let it fall. It hit the floor with soft, final thud. "What happened?" my mother whispered, her face pale. Was it a call? A mass casualty incident? She was looking for a logical reason, a heroic explanation for what was, in reality, an unforgivable act of betrayal. A part of me, the planner, the fixers, desperately wanted that to be true, but I had seen the look on Mike's face. It wasn't the look of the first responder rushing to a tragedy. It was the look of a man running to something or someone else. The room began to tilt. The vibrant colors of the stained glass windows swam before my eyes, melting into nauseating squall. The whispers turned into a dull roar in my eyes. The last thing I heard before the world went black was my mother's terrified shriek. I woke up to a smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of the machine. My head was pounding. For a disoriented second, I thought I was in a hotel room, that the whole wedding had been a terrible nightmare. Then I saw the IV drip in my arm and the thin, sketchy blanket covering me. I wasn't in my dress anymore. I was in a flimsy hospital gown. It was real, all of it. A nurse with kind, tired eyes came into the room. "Well, hello there," she said gently. "You gave your family quite a scare. You fainted. It's likely just exhaustion and stress, but the doctor wants to run a few tests to be sure." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The humiliation washed over me again, so intense it felt like a physical fever. I imagined the scene at the church, my parents trying to explain the unexplainable, the guests awkwardly eating the reception food out of obligation before fleeing. The nurse was checking my vitals, her pants scratching against a clipboard. "Your blood pressure is a little high, but that's to be expected. We need you to take it easy from here on. Dehydration and stress are no good." He paused, then gave me a soft, knowing smile. "You need to take care of yourself. You're not just living for one anymore." I stared at her blankly. "What?" "The blood work came back," she said, her smile widening. "Congratulations, you're pregnant, about 6 weeks long, the doctor estimates." The words hung in the sterile air, completely detached from reality. Pregnant, a baby, our baby. The one we had talked about for years. The next phase of our perfect plan. We were going to start trying after the honeymoon. It was supposed to be the most joyous news of my life. Instead, it felt like a cruel joke, delivered by a merciless universe. I slowly placed a hand on my flat stomach, under the thin hospital gown. There was a life in there, a tiny piece of me, and the man who has just abandoned me at the altar. A sob caught in my throat, a ragged, painful sound. It was another hour before he showed up. He looked awful. His tuxedo was rumpled. His tie was gone, and there was a dark circle under his eyes. He was holding a sad-looking cup of hospital coffee. He stood in the doorway, radiating guilt. "Ava," he said, his voice raspy. "I am so sorry." I didn't say anything. I just watched him, my face a cold, blank mask. I took a step into the room. He took a step into the room. Her name is Chloe. She was going to jump from the roof of her apartment building. She called 911 and specifically asked for me. Said I was the only one who could talk to her down. Dave knew I was the last paramedic to treat her. Ava, I had no choice. It was a life or death situation. He said it like he was the hero of the story, like he had made a noble sacrifice. He hadn't even asked if I was okay. He hadn't noticed the IV. He hadn't asked why I was in a hospital bed. His entire world revolved around his own dramatic decisions. "You had a choice, Mike," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the room like ice. "You could have let another paramedic handle it. You could have let the police handle it. You chose to leave me, in front of everyone we know, to go play hero for someone else." "It's not like that," he insisted, his voice rising. "You don't understand her situation. She is fragile. She needs me." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "Look, I know today was a disaster. I hate myself for it, but we can fix it." "Well, we'll postpone. Just for a few months. I just need to help Chloe to get stable, get her into some kind of treatment. Then we can get married. It'll be even better, I promise." Postpone. The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking me to put our life on hold, to pencil our wedding into his schedule for some later date, once his charity case were dealt with. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief, the shock, the heartbreak is all crystallized into a single, sharp point of cold, hard clarity. I looked at this man I had loved for 7 years, the man I was going to build a future with, a father of the child growing inside me, and I felt nothing but a profound and chilling emptiness. "Get out," I said. "What?" "Ava, just listen. Get out." He stared at me, shocked, and for the first time, the flicker of real fear entered his eyes. He finally saw that I wasn't going to just upset his excuses. He left without another word. The next morning, after my parents drove me home in a heavy, suffocating silence, I walked into the bungalow we had built together, our house. Every corner screamed his name. His coffee mug was by the sink. His worn-out boots were by the door. I walked into our bedroom and pulled the suitcase from the closet. I moved like a robot, mechanically pulling my clothes from the drawers, not allowing myself to think or feel. I was folding a sweater when I heard a key in front door. My heart stopped. It was Mike. I braced myself for another round of apologies, of excuses, of pleas for me to understand. He stepped inside, his expression wary, wary. Ava, can we please just talk about this? But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the person standing nervously behind him in the doorway. It was a girl, small and pale, with wide doe-like eyes that darted around the room as if she were a frightened bird. She was swimming in a familiar piece of clothing. Mike's favorite gray university hoodie. The one he always wore on lazy Sundays. The one that smelled like him. And in that moment, I knew she hadn't just destroyed our wedding. She had already moved into our home. The silence in the room was thick and suffocating. The three of us stood frozen in a bizarre triangle of betrayal. Me, holding a half-folded sweater, my life packed into boxes around me. Mike standing in the middle of the living room he was supposed to be sharing with his wife, and her, Chloe, peeking out from behind his shoulder, clutching the sleeve of his hoodie like a child hiding from the storm. Her presence in my home, wearing his clothes, was a violation so profound it stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't a rescue anymore. This was an invasion. Before I could even form the word, the sound of another car pulling up broke the spell. A moment later, my parents and Mike's parents, Robert and Carol, walked in through the still open front door. He had come to help me, to offer support, to do what families do. They all stopped dead in their tracks. 6 pairs of eyes landed on the scene. Mike, and the strange, waif-like girls clinging to him. Carol, Mike's mother, was the first to speak. Her voice was trembling whisper. "Michael, who is this?" Mike's face, which had been pale with guilt, now flushed a deep, shameful red. He gently tried to detach Chloe's hand from his arm, but she only clung tighter. "Mom, Dad, that is Chloe," he mumbled, not looking at anyone. She was just discharged. She has nowhere to go. I just letting her grab a few things." It was the wickedest lie I had ever heard. And Robert, his father, a man I'd always known to be gentle and good-humored, saw right through it. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his face a mask of thunderous fury. "You have the nerve," Robert began, his voice dangerous low, "to bring another woman into this house, the house Ava built with you, less than 24 hours after you humiliated her in front of God and everyone we know." "That is not what you think," Mike pleaded, his voice cracking. That's when it happened. On one swift, shocking motion, Robert raised his hand and slapped his son across the face. The crack of the impact echoed through the half-empty room. It wasn't a tap. It was a hard, stinging blow born a lifetime of disappointment condensed into a single second. Mike stumbled back, his hand flying into his cheek, his eyes wide with disbelief. Chloe let out a tiny, theatrical gasp. "You are not no son of mine," Robert seethed, tears with pure rage glistening his eyes. "The boy I raised was a man of his word, a man of honor, not a coward who breaks his promises and shatters the heart of the best woman he would ever have." I watched the scene unfold with a strange sense of detachment. The drama didn't feel like mine anymore. I walked over to the kitchen counter, where my purse and keys were sitting. I picked them up, the familiar weight, a small comfort in the chaos. "Ava, please," Mike said, turning to me, his eye pleading. "Don't do this. We can fix it." I looked at him, really looked at him, and the man I had loved for 7 years was gone. In his place was a stranger, a weak man driven by a twisted need to be a savior, even if it meant destroying everything good in his own life. "There's nothing to fix, Mike," I said, my boy eerily calm. I reached into my purse and pulled out the single key to the bungalow. I walked over to him, past his stunned parents, and opened his hand. I placed the key in his palm and closed his finger around it. "The house is yours. I hope it's worth it." Then, flanked by my parents, I walked out the front door and never looked back. The first few months were a blur of logistics and grief. I found a small, sunlit apartment in a quiet coastal town in Oregon, 3 states and a world away from Chicago. The salt-laced air was a cleansing balm. I set up a home office and took a remote event planning projects, creating perfect days for other people, while my own was a ruin in my rearview mirror. But I wasn't just going through the motions. I had a reason, a secret purpose. Every morning, I would wake up and place a hand on my growing belly. With every tiny flutter, and later, every firm kick, a fierce, protective love grew inside me, crowding out the pain. This baby saved me. It gave me a reason to eat when I had no appetite, a reason to get out of bed when my heart felt like a block of lead. It was a future, a promise that my life wasn't over. It was just beginning. My parents were my lifeline. They never pushed, never pried. They just showed up. My dad to assemble a crib. My mom to stock my fridge with healthy food. They talked about Mike's family sometimes, in hushed tones. His parents, Robert and Carol, were devastated and deeply ashamed. They had stopped speaking to Mike entirely. Meanwhile, back in the Chicago bungalow, Mike's life was unraveling. The story, as I pieced it together from my mom's reluctant updates, were a slow-motion car crash. Chloe never left. The just grabbing a few things turned into a permanent residency. She didn't work. She didn't see a therapist. Her life became a cycle of manufacturer crisis. One day, she'd have a panic attack because he was 10 minutes late from a shift. The next, she'd accuse him of not caring because he fell asleep on the couch instead of listening to her rehash the same childhood traumas for the 100th time. The house we had lovingly stored fell into disarray, littered with takeout containers and her discarded clothes. He was trapped. He was satisfied his wedding, his family, and his honor for this girl. To admit he'd made a catastrophic mistake would be to admit his grand, historic gesture was all for nothing. So he doubled down, become her 24/7 caretaker, her emotional support animal. The breaking point came out 3 months after I left. Chloe, in the fit peak, because Mike had to work a double shift, decided to pay him a visit. She showed up in a paramedic station in the middle of the day. She was wearing pajamas and slippers and her hair a mess, her eyes wild. She stormed past the front desk and found the crew in the garage. During their equipment checks, she launched herself at Mike, sobbing hysterically. "You left me alone," she shrieked, for all his colleagues to hear. "I thought you were dead. Nobody would answer my calls." Dave who has once Mike's closest friends on the force, just stared, his face a mixture of disgust and pity. The other paramedics shuffled their feet, trying to look busy, pretending they couldn't hear her accusing his co-workers of being cold and unfeeling. It was a spectacular, humiliating scene. The station caption, "No nonsense veteran," pulled Mike into his office. That evening, I was sitting in my new rocking chair, rubbing my belly and humming a lullaby, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. "Just heard from Carol. Mike was put on administrative leave, desk duty indefinitely. Dave and 2 others filed a formal complaint against him. They said his personal drama was become a liability in the field." I read the text, and I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt a quiet, sad finality. The hero had fallen. He hadn't been taken down by a 5-alarm fire on a highway pileup. He had been taken down by the very person he had torched his own life to save. The silence in Chicago bungalow had become physical weight after 3 months of desk duty, and Chloe's constant, suffocating presence. Mike finally snapped. It happened on a Tuesday evening. He had come home from 8 hours filing paperwork, a job he hated, to find the kitchen sink overflowing with dirty dishes and Chloe curled on the sofa, crying because he hadn't answered her 5th check-in text of the afternoon. "I thought you'd left me," he sobbed. The same tired script he'd used since the wedding. "I was looking at the pill bottle, Mike. I was so close." Usually, this would send Mike into a frantic spiral of apologies and rescuing. But today, something in him was just dead. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a victim, but a parasite. "Then do it, Chloe," he said, his voice flat and terrifying calm. He froze. Her tears stopped midstream. "What?" "Open the bottle, or open the window," Mike said, gesturing to the grass. "I'm done. I traded my wife, my reputation, and my family to be your full-time crutch, and you haven't taken a single step on your own. I'm not your paramedic anymore. I'm just a guy who's out of air." He walked out. He didn't take a suitcase. He just took his car keys and his wallet. He spent the next 3 days driving west, fueled by caffeine and a desperate, clawing need to find a woman he had discarded. He had finally pried the location out of the distant cousin who had seen Ava's post on the private social media group. Cannon Beach, Oregon. The drive was 3 states of pure regret. Every mile marker was a reminder of 7 years he'd thrown away. By the time he pulled into foggy, salt-sprayed town on Oregon coast, Mike looked like a ghost of the man who had stood at the altar. He was thinner, his beard was overgrown, and his eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. He found her on the Thursday morning. The town was beautiful, rocked cliffs, white beaches, and a slow, peaceful pace that felt like exact opposite the chaos he'd lived in Chicago. He saw her sitting on the patio on a small shingle cafe. Ava was wearing a thick, oversized cream sweater and leggings. She was leaning back in her chair, a book about the first year resting in her lap. She looked radiant. Her skin was clear. Her hair was tied back in a messy and thoughtless bun. And there was a serene smile on her face as she watched the seagulls. Mike's heart did a painful somersault. He stepped out of his truck, his legs trembling. He walked toward the patio, his shadow falling across her table. Ava looked up. The smile didn't vanish instantly. It faded slowly, replaced by a cool, professional mask of indifference. He didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just closed her book. "Hello, Michael," she said, her voice steady, like a calm sea. Mike couldn't speak. His throat were a desert. He pulled down the chair opposite her and sank into it, his body giving out. "Ava," he managed to choke out. You look different." "I am different," she replied. Then she stood up to reach for her water glass, and the oversized sweater shifted. Mike's breath hitched. His eye dropped into her midsection. Beneath the knit fabric was a very clear and very prominent, very round bump. He felt like he'd been gut-punched. The air left his lungs in a sharp hiss. He began to do a math in his head: the wedding, the hospital, the months of silence. "Is that—" he stammered, his hands instinctively reaching out across the table, though he didn't dare touch her. "Ava, is that mine?" Ava sat back down, her hands interlaced protectively over her belly. "It's mine, Mike." "He's mine." "He?" Mike whispered, his eye filling with tears. "A boy." "Ava, oh my God, why didn't you tell me? I was at the hospital that night. I saw you." "You were at the hospital for her," Ava reminded him, her voice sharpening just a fraction. "You stood by my bed and told me you wanted to postpone our life so you could take care of another woman. You didn't even ask why I was in that bed, Mike. You didn't ask if I was okay. You just asked for understanding for the girl who tried to kill herself to get your attention." "I would have stayed," Mike cried, his voice breaking, drawing stares from the other patrons. "If I had known about the baby, I never would have left that church. I would have sent Dave. I would have stayed at that altar. Everything would be different." Ava looked at him with a pity that was more painful than hate. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," she said. "I didn't want a man who stayed out of obligation. I didn't want my son to grow up in a house where his father was a hero to every manipulative stranger on the street, but a stranger to his own family. You chose your path, Mike. You chose Chloe. You chose the drama. I chose peace." "I left her," Mike pleaded, tears now streaming down his face. "I'm done with her, Ava. I would do anything. I'll move here. I would work at a grocery store. I just want to be a father. I want our family back." Ava stood up, picking up her book and her bag. She looked down at him, a broken, weeping man in a cheap cafe chair. "You don't get it, do you?" she said softly. "You think this is a movie where the hero realizes his mistake in the final act and everything goes back to normal. But this is real life, Mike. You didn't just make a mistake. You showed me exactly who you are when things get hard. And that man, he isn't allowed near my son." She turned and began to walk away, and her gait slightly heavy but graceful. "Ava," he called out, his voice cracking with desperation. She stopped and looked back one last time. "Don't follow me, Mike. I have an apartment, a job, and a support system that doesn't include you. If you really want to do something heroic for once, leave us alone." He walked around the corner, leaving Mike sitting in the bright Oregon sun, surrounded by smell of salt and coffee, completely utterly alone. For the first time in his life, he couldn't save anyone, least of all himself. The winter in Oregon was different from the harsh, biting winds of Chicago. Here, it was a damp, heavy cold that turned the world a mystery gray, but inside my little house, everything was golden. Baby Liam had arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks early and ready to take on the world. Then the nurses first placed him on my chest. I felt a shift in the universe. On the lingering shadows of the last year, the empty altar, the hushed whispers, the sight of Mike in that hoodie, simply evaporated. Liam was my North Star. He was the living, breathing proof that walking away from a toxic fire was the only way to keep from being burned alive. I was sitting in a rocking chair by the window, nursing Liam, when the doorbell rang. My father, Richard, was in the kitchen making coffee. He has stayed with me since the birth, a silent, steady mountain of support. I heard the front door open, followed by a heavy, jagged silence. "You've got lots of nerve," my dad's voice boomed. It wasn't loud, but it was hard, the kind of tone a man uses when he's protecting something precious. "Richard, please, I heard he was born," a raspy, broken voice replied. My heart didn't race, my hand didn't shake. I felt a strange, cold calm as I buttoned my shirt and placed Liam gently into his yellow bassinet. I walked into the hallway and saw them. Mike was standing on the porch, framed by the cold mist. He looked like a man who had been sleeping in his car for weeks. His clothes were wrinkled. His face was gaunt. His eyes were hollow pits with exhaustion. He looked decades older than the proud paramedic I had once loved. He was holding a small silver box, his knuckles white as he gripped it. "Ava," he whispered, his voice cracking. He looked past my father at me, and for a second I saw a flash of the old Mike, the one who I used to look at me, like I was in his tile world. "He's here," Mike said, a tear escaping and trailing down his cheek. "I know I don't have a right to be here. I know I destroyed everything, but please just let me see him for 1 minute." My father moved close to the door, but I put a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, Dad. Let me handle this." I stepped down on the porch, closing the door behind me, just enough so the cold wouldn't reach the baby. Mike immediately dropped his knees. It was pathetic, desperate gesture. "I'm so sorry, Ava," he sobbed, his head bowed. "I was an animal. I was a fool. I left Chloe months ago. I went to therapy. I tried to fix my head. I even quit the department because I couldn't stand the way they looked at me. I've changed. I swear I have." He held up the silver box like an offering. "Please, let me fix it. I will work any job. I will sleep on the porch. I just want my family back." I looked down at him. And I didn't feel the triumph I thought I would. I didn't feel the burning need to scream or hit him. I just felt a deep, weary pity. "Open the box, Mike," I said quietly. With trembling fingers, he tore away the ribbon. Inside was a pair of tiny, hand-knitted blue booties. They were beautiful, delicate, and far too late. I took the box from his hands. "They are lovely," I said, and meant it. "I'll put them on him after his bath. And when he's older, I'll tell him they were a gift from the man who helped give him life." A spark of hope lit up my face. He started to stand up, a ghost of smile touching his lips. "Does that mean you forgive me? Can we try it again?" I shook my head slowly. The spark in his eye died instantly. "I do forgive you, Mike," I said. "I forgave you the moment I realized I didn't love you anymore. I forgive you so that my son doesn't grow up with a mother who carries a backpack full of stones. But forgiveness isn't an invitation." I took a step back toward the door. "You're a good man in a crisis, Mike. But you're a terrible man in marriage. You love the rescue, but you hate the reality. You'll be hearing from my lawyer about child support, because Liam deserves that much. But that's the only connection you have to this house. Ava, please, don't do this," he cried, reaching out for the hem of my sweater. "I'm not doing anything, Mike," I said, my voice as firm as Oregon clips. "I'm just finishing the store you started at that church. You play with fire. You burned down our future. Now you have to live in the ashes." I stepped inside and closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt, the click sounding like final period at the end of a long, painful chapter. I didn't stay by the door to listen to his muffled sobs. I walked back into the living room, where afternoon sun was finally breaking through the clouds, hitting the floor in long golden strips. I picked Liam. He was awake, his tiny blue eyes looking at me with total, uncomplicated trust. I pressed my face into his soft neck, breathing in the scent of milk and new beginnings. I was a mother. I was a survivor. And for the first time in my life, I was truly, beautifully free.